Hi, Katie. It's Catherine's mom again. I'm back with Chapter 2 of The Ghosts of Tupelo Landing. And I did want you to know that in the South, which is where this story takes place, it is customary for people to call older women by Miss and their first names, and older men by Mr. and their first names. So you'll hear Miss Lana, Miss Rose, and so forth. Okay, Chapter 2 is called Crenshaw, Harm Crenshaw. An hour later, Dale and me settled in the back seat of Grandmother Miss Lacey's old Buick. "I don't see why he has to ride with us," Dale said, watching Harm Crenshaw swagger across the parking lot. "Grandmother Miss Lacey's generous about giving rides," I said. "It cuts both ways." The dark-haired boy opened Dale's door and peered in. "Queen Elizabeth gets queasy without a window seat," I told him. "You sit in the middle." Harm Crenshaw crawled over Queen Elizabeth and Dale and collapsed into the space between us, reeking of cheap aftershave. I rolled my window down. "You aren't old enough to shave," I said. He stared straight ahead, his knobby knees nearly bumping his chin. Grandmother Miss Lacey slipped behind the wheel and adjusted the rearview mirror. "You look familiar, Harm," she said as Miss Lana clambered in the front seat with her white parasol. "Have we met?" "Nope. I'm here for the auction and then back to Greensboro as fast as I can go." "Don't nope her," Dale said, pulling Queen Elizabeth into his lap. "It ain't polite." Harm shifted, his pants legs rising to reveal pale, bony ankles and no socks. "Somebody told me the inn they're selling is haunted," he said. "It's got to be a lie. Who'd want to spend eternity here?" I glared at him, but Dale gulped. "Haunted?" "Don't be ridiculous," Grandmother Miss Lacey said. "I've lived here 80 years. If there were a ghost story connected to that inn, I assure you I'd know it." We rode in silence past the Piggly Wiggly, which is a grocery store, past the old brick school to the sign at the town's edge, Tupelo Landing, population 148. Someone had scrawled a 7 over the 8. Harm Crenshaw raised an eyebrow. "Murder," I explained. "Dale and me solved it." "Sure you did," he murmured. "Prescott," Dale whispered. I reached into my olive drab messenger bag and rummaged through the clue pads and hand-lettered business cards for our laminated newspaper clip. I passed it to him. This is what it said. "Local kids help solve murder. Miss Mo Lobo and Dale Earnhardt Johnson III, rising 6th graders, have helped solve a murder. Authorities say in the process they also helped put Dale's father behind bars and jump-started the memory of Mo's guardian, the Colonel, a cafe owner who had total amnesia," that means he lost his memory, "for over a decade. To make a long story short, I remembered I'm an attorney and that I used to be engaged to Lana," the Colonel told the reporter. "Realizing I'm an attorney has been a blow. But Mo and Dale did a great job with their first case, and I'm proud of them. Now order something or get out." Mo and Dale, who founded Desperado Detective Agency in June, are accepting new cases. Call the cafe for details. Harm Crenshaw handed it back without a word. Jerk. "What are you buying today, Miss Lana?" I asked to break the silence. "An umbrella stand," she said. "A bit of Tupelo history." "Boring," Harm Crenshaw said beneath his breath. I elbowed him hard. "And I'm only here for the excitement," Grandmother Miss Lacey said. We crept across Fool's Bridge, past the old store with its ancient bubble-headed gas pumps, through acres of spent tobacco and drying corn. "Here's my old shortcut," Grandmother Miss Lacey said, easing the Buick onto a faint path. "Father used to come this way in the Duesenberg." Dale jumped like Queen Elizabeth spotting a squirrel. A Duesenberg? He looked over at me. Duesenbergs were super expensive roadsters made in Germany, he said. Dale's people know cars. Made in Indiana, actually, Harm said as we bounced into a clearing. Geez, he gasped before Dale could reply. Who lives there? The unpainted farmhouse listed on brick piers like a squared-off old woman rising on a bad knee. Queen Elizabeth jumped up, her tail wagging as she peered at a pack of bone-thin beagles and a rickety pen. I believe that's Red Baker's place, Miss Lana said as the Buick eased forward. Why? Harm shouldered Queen Elizabeth aside to stare out the window. Whose place? Does he even have electricity? Good question. There wasn't an electric line in sight. Red Baker, I said. The moonshiner. That means he made illegal liquor. The Azalea women say, Mo lo bo, Grandmother Miss Lacy said. I will not have you spreading rumors. She slammed on the brakes, sending Queen Elizabeth tumbling to the floor, and whipped around to stare at Harm. Do you know Red Baker, young man? Me? How would I know somebody like that? The wind shifted and he grimaced. Doesn't he ever clean out that dog pen? It stinks. She gave him an inscrutable old person stare as Dale hoisted a kicking Queen Elizabeth back into his lap. Will wonders never cease, she murmured to Miss Lana, and turned back to her driving. Old people, Dale whispered. Go figure. Miss Lacy eased the Buick through Red Baker's dirt yard into a grassy meadow of cars and trucks. Dale pointed to a red sports car as we tumbled from the Buick. Over there, he said. Harm stalked off without even a goodbye. This time I said it aloud. Jerk! I did my upstream mother scan of the crowd, a check for possible relatives. See anybody that looks like you? Dale asked. I squinted. The grounds swarmed with strangers and townfolk. The Azalea women trooped toward the red and white auction tent. Sal, in her red sunglasses, sailed behind them. Miss Retzel sat beneath the tent, while Attila, who had perched beside her, was chatting her so-called heart out. I shook my head. But there's Lavender, I cried, and my morning went golden. Dale's big brother, Lavender, stood in the shade of a maple, his tanned arms crossed, talking to one of the big-haired twins, either Chrissy or Missy, I couldn't tell which. Have I mentioned I will one day marry Lavender? Lavender, who's 19, laughs whenever I ask him, which is not the same as saying no. Lavender, I bellowed, rocking up on my toes and waving. A grin split his face as I sprinted toward him. Hey, I said, skidding to a sophisticated halt. I see you run aground on a twin. Chrissy, he said, you remember Mo Lobo and my little brother Dale, don't you? Sure, I remember, she said, sipping a Diet 7-Up. I met them at the Speedway the night you wrecked your race car. Met him, too. She nodded toward a nearby picnic table. He was driving the car that spun you into the wall. He did that? I said, zeroing in on the driver of the red sports car. Flick Crenshaw, Lavender said. He drives the 45 car. Flick looked about Lavender's age. Beyond that, they were about as alike as yes and no. Lavender has eyes blue as October's sky and hair like just mown wheat. He's wiry and tall and flows like a lullaby. Dark-haired Flick Crenshaw looked coiled and compact, an explosion set to happen. Flick smirked at us, scooped the blonde woman close and whispered in her ear. She barked out a laugh. Huh. Ignore them, Lavender said. Cars bump, Mo. It's part of racing. Almost killing somebody ain't. He shrugged. Flick's one of those guys you pass in life. You steer around him if you can. If you can't, you don't let him slow you down more than you have to. Right, I said, making a mental note to hate Flick for eternity. Chrissy narrowed her eyes. Wonder what Flick's doing here, she said. You think he's buying the inn? Nah, Lavender said. If he has money, he's driving it or wearing it. But I hear Red Baker's interested. His property backs up against this one, and he has money. He got most of Daddy's, Dale said. That's what Mama says. Let's go talk to people, Chrissy said, like Dale and me weren't people. She slipped her hand into Lavender's, but he didn't budge. I followed his gaze to Harm, who elbowed through the crowd with 3 drinks. Flick grabbed 2, handed one to the blonde, and punched Harm's shoulder. Harm swiveled with the blow, hiding a wince. That's Flick's little brother, Lavender said, glancing at Dale. I'd stay away from him if I was you. He'll be trouble as soon as he figures out how. Dale nodded. I'd love to stay and chat with you, Chrissy, I said, but I and Dale are here on detective business. Come on, Dale, I said. Let's check out the inn. Now? Dale gulped, after what Harm said about a ghost. Lavender gave him a wink. Go on, little brother. There's no such thing as ghosts, he said, as Chrissy tugged him away from us. Bye, Lavender, I called. Good luck with those head lice. Chrissy dropped his hand. Lavender grinned at me and followed her into the crowd. I peered at the tent where auctioneer Buddha Jackson warmed up the crowd. Everybody got a number? Buddha asked, whipping the microphone cord behind him like a rock star. Bidding's easiest with a number. We'll auction a little furniture, then the inn with whatever's left inside. I only want an umbrella stand, Miss Lina shouted. She'd slipped into her 1960 sunglasses, the round ones with the white rims, and closed her parasol. Buddha pointed at her. Yes, ma'am, Miss Lana. I'll be looking for you. Now let's talk about what conveys. That means what goes with the inn itself. Those of you bidding on the inn, listen up. I think you'll find this amusing. He continued as Miss Lana and Grandmother Miss Lacey Thornton meandered toward the refreshment wagon. I turned to Dale. As Tupelo Landing's most successful detectives, we really ought to scope out the inn. Investigating means bragging rights in 6th grade. And Lavender says it's safe, I reminded him. To Dale, Lavender's word is gospel. He gave a faint nod. Brace you, I said, before he could change his mind. We sprinted for the wooded path leading to the inn, Queen Elizabeth at our heels. There it is, I said as the path opened onto a ragged lawn. The ancient 2-story inn may have been a beauty in her day, but today, with her windows boarded up and her front porch sagging, she looked forlorn and helpless on knee-deep carpet of weeds. The steps listed, that means they leaned. Rust streaked the tin roof. Shaggy cedars crowded the drive. Okay, we've seen it, Dale said, stepping over a no trespassing sign someone had pried from its post. Let's go. Don't be a baby, I told him as a quick pop, pop, pop rolled from the thicket. My heart jumped. Who's there? I demanded. The thicket rustled. A white-haired man with a sharp fox face peered between the branches. Queen Elizabeth growled, her hackles rising, and Dale grabbed her collar. Red Baker stepped onto the path. Most days, Mr. Red looks like a bundle of throwaway clothes. Today, he wore shoes fresh from the box, creased chinos, a blinding white shirt, and a red bow tie. Hey, I said, and his pale eyes flickered over me like lizard eyes on a fly. Mr. Red looked Dale up and down. You're Macon Johnson's boy, he said, his voice splintery as just sawn pine. I hear he's doing time in Raleigh for a murder he didn't commit. You almost heard right, Dale said, very smooth. Dale's family is jail-prone. To him, jail time is as normal as clean socks. Daddy's over in county lockup on reduced charges. We're hoping for a plea bargain or a smart attorney. That we would be Dale and Queen Elizabeth, not Dale's mama, Miss Rose, who hocked her diamond in June. Miss Rose ain't studying Dale's daddy. Neither am I. Not after the things he's done. You bidding today, Mr. Red? I asked. I hear you want to buy the inn. You're nosy, he said. He didn't say it mean. He said it straight out. Occupational hazard, I said. Detective, I added, in case he hadn't heard. He cracked his knuckles. That explained the popping sound. nervous joints. He licked his thin lips. You headed for the inn? There's nothing in there but run down, wore out, and fell through. And it's haunted, thicker than the devil's parlor. I'd turn around if I was you. Haunted? Thicker than the devil's parlor? Dale stammered. I didn't know he had one. He turned to me, his blue eyes worried. Have you ever heard of that? He whispered. A parlor at the bad place? Dale is a Baptist. He doesn't worry about much in life, but he worries about the devil afterward. Mr. Red stared at him. You two best head for folks that make footprints. He peered up the path and cracked his knuckles again. Who's that? A boy strolled around the bend, barely whistling. Harm Crenshaw, Dale said, from Greensboro. You want to meet him? I've been working on my social skills. I can introduce you. He cupped his hands around his mouth. Hey, Harm! Come meet Mr. Red Baker, he called. Harm froze. He and Mr. Red stared at each other like wild animals. Harm spun and marched the other way as Mr. Red faded back into the forest. Weird, Dale murmured. True, but we got enough weird in our lives without worrying about theirs. Come on, we haven't got much time, I said, and plowed through the weeds to the inn's creaky steps. The wind blew, setting 3 splittery old rocking chairs rocking. And what did Mr. Red mean when he said we should head for folks that make footprints? Dale asked as we crossed the front porch. He meant to scare you. Right, he said. I'm pretty sure it worked. I pushed the heavy front door and it moaned open, scraping an arc across the dusty floor. I followed Queen Elizabeth into the gloom and waited for my eyes to adjust. A tin ceiling soared high above us. A snaggle-toothed mahogany staircase climbed along one cracked plaster wall. To our right, the huge dining room stood a jumble in crippled tables and upturned chairs. Its chandelier wore a bride's veil of spider webs and dust. Queen Elizabeth darted away, her nose zigzagging across a carpet worn so thin I could see the plank skeleton underneath. This way, I whispered, heading into a parlor of sheet-covered settees and chairs. Settees are like a couch. Hey, a piano, Dale said, relaxing. Like I said, Dale's musical. He strained to open the keyboard. The hinge's rusty squeal echoed around the room. Dale spread his hands over the uneven yellowed keys, and the piano's tinny voice plinked through the dusty silence. The front door banged against the wall behind us, and we jumped. For heaven's sake, a woman said. I don't care what that hideous old man says. That is not a ghost playing the piano. A pin-skinny woman minced into the room, trailed by a pudgy man. She surveyed us like we came with the furniture. See, just kids. I surveyed her right back. Thin face, spiky black hair, jittery eyes, sleeveless black sweater, skinny pants, and black stilettos. She crossed her bone-thin arms and jutted her hip forward like a high-fashion wharf rat. She ain't from around here, Dale whispered. Dale has a flair for the obvious. The woman squinted at the pressed tin ceiling, clacked to a window, and peered between the boards. Well, at least it's waterfront. I'll pay $210,000, not a penny more. Let's register, she told the pudgy man. You kids stay away from that piano. It's mine, she added, and headed out the front door. Rat face, I muttered. I would have said more, but Miss Lana don't allow cursing. She does allow the creative use of animal names. She's buying this place? Because she'd be a terrible neighbor, Dale said, looking nervous. Unless she sings alto, which Mama says if you can sing alto, that means a lot to people. Dale's mama directs the church choir. Don't worry, I said. She'd only buy this place to tear it down, but she would make a rotten neighbor. Miss Lana would hate her. Grandmother Miss Lacey would too. Upstairs, glass crashed to the floor. Queen Elizabeth yelped and darted behind me. Who's there? I shouted, trying to rub the goosebumps off my arms. I caught a whiff of rosemary, and Queen Elizabeth sneezed. A laugh floated down the stairway, secret and low. My heart jumped. So did Dale. "Steady, Dale," I said, my voice shaking. "Don't leap to conclusions. A good detective starts with the obvious and works toward the strange." "You're making that up," he whispered. "It could still be true," I said. "Somebody's messing with us," I added, walking to the bottom of the stairs. 2 solid stairs, 3 missing steps, 8 solid stairs. "Hello?" The dust on the stairs lay thick and untouched. Someone skipped along the upstairs hall. "That's a definite girl," Dale whispered. "A boy would rather die than skip like that." He whipped around to stare at me, his blue eyes wide. "Did I say die? That's just a figure of speech. I didn't mean anything." A laugh floated down the stairs. "Run!" Dale said. I grabbed his arm, spinning him in a circle. "Hold your ground. If we run, it will be all over school. It's probably Attila trying to show us up." "I don't think so," he said, pointing to the open door. Outside, Attila sailed across the inn's lawn, making a beeline for the auction tent. Another laugh floated down the stairs. Queen Elizabeth threw back her head and howled, wild as a wolf in moonlight. I looked down at Queen Elizabeth. She looked up at me. We both looked at the open door. Dale was halfway across the yard, elbows and knees pumping like the devil's hounds were nipping at his heels. And that's the end of chapter 2.